Think about someone you know, someone who aced every exam, top of the class, brilliant grades, the kind of person everyone assumed was going to absolutely crush it in life. Now think about where they are today. And then think about someone else, maybe someone who struggled in school, who never quite fit the system, who teachers probably wrote off at some point, and think about where they are today. Because chances are, if you're honest, the second person surprised you. They built something, or they figured people out in a way the first person never could, or they made decisions under pressure that the smarter person completely fell apart under. And you probably found yourself wondering at some point, what exactly is intelligence? And am I measuring it all wrong? Here's the answer that took scientists decades to figure out. Yes, you are. We all are. And what they found hiding beyond the IQ score changes everything about how you see your own potential. Let's start at the beginning. IQ, intelligence quotient, was invented in 1905. A French psychologist named Alfred Binet created it not to rank human intelligence, but to identify children who needed extra support in school. That was the entire original purpose, a practical tool for a specific educational problem. And then, something happened that Binet himself warned against. People started treating the number as a fixed measure of a person's worth, their ceiling, their potential, their destiny. By the mid-20th century, IQ scores were being used to make decisions about careers, military assignments, even who was considered fit to have children. The number took on a weight it was never designed to carry. And here's the uncomfortable truth. IQ is real. It measures something real. People who score higher on IQ tests do tend to perform better on certain tasks, particularly tasks involving pattern recognition, logical reasoning, and processing speed. But here is what it does not measure. It does not measure your ability to read a room, to motivate a team, to bounce back from failure, to make wise decisions when you're exhausted and under pressure, to build trust with another human being, to know when to push and when to let go. And it turns out, those things, in almost every real-world measure of success and well-being, those things matter more. So the question became, if IQ isn't the full picture, what is? In 1990, two psychologists, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, published a paper that would quietly shift how we think about the human mind. They proposed that there was another form of intelligence, one that had nothing to do with logic puzzles or pattern recognition, one that operated in a completely different domain. They called it emotional intelligence, EQ, the ability to recognize emotions in yourself and in others, to understand what those emotions are telling you, to manage them in a way that guides your thinking and behavior rather than hijacking it, and to use that understanding to navigate relationships, conflict, and high-pressure situations. Now, when people first hear emotional intelligence, they sometimes roll their eyes a little. It sounds soft, vague, like something you'd read on a motivational poster. But the data is anything but soft. Studies comparing IQ and EQ as predictors of life outcomes found something striking. In professional settings, leadership, team performance, sales, negotiation, EQ consistently outperformed IQ as a predictor of success, not by a little, significantly. One landmark study found that 90% of top performers in their field scored high in emotional intelligence, and that people with high EQ earned on average, hold on to this, $29,000 more per year than their lower EQ counterparts, with the same qualifications, the same experience, the same IQ. The difference was how they handled people, including themselves. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because even EQ, as powerful as it is still just one piece of a much larger picture. Researchers in neuroscience and cognitive science have been quietly building a new framework for intelligence, one that goes beyond IQ and EQ entirely, one that looks at the brain not as a single processor, but as a network. And what they found is that the most intelligent people, in the fullest, most real-world sense, aren't necessarily the ones with the fastest processors. They're the ones with the best connections. Think of it this way.
Imagine two cities. City A has an incredibly fast central computer. Everything runs through it. It's powerful. But if that computer gets overloaded or one connection goes down, everything stalls. City B has a network, thousands of nodes all talking to each other. No single point of failure. When one route is blocked, information finds another way. The city keeps moving. Your brain works the same way. What neuroscientists call network intelligence, the ability of different regions of your brain to communicate fluidly and efficiently, predicts real-world performance better than raw processing speed alone.
And here's the part that connects everything. The things that build network intelligence, the things that strengthen those connections between brain regions, sleep, physical movement, genuine social connection, novel learning, managing chronic stress. Sound familiar? Everything we talked about in the last 2 episodes, the sleep switch, the FTL1 protein, the synaptic connections weakening with age, it all feeds into this. Your intelligence is not a fixed number stamped on you at birth. It is a living, dynamic system, and you have more influence over it than any test ever told you. So if intelligence is more than IQ, what does it actually look like in practice? Researchers have converged on roughly 4 dimensions that together paint a complete picture. The first is analytical intelligence. This is closest to what IQ measures: logical reasoning, pattern recognition, problem solving. Useful, important, but not sufficient on its own. The second is emotional intelligence, reading people, managing yourself, navigating relationships with skill and awareness, the dimension that most consistently separates good performers from great ones in almost every field. The third is practical intelligence. This is street smarts dressed up in scientific language, the ability to figure out how things actually work in the real world, not just in theory. The person who reads a room correctly and acts on it. The one who knows when the rule book doesn't apply. Research by psychologist Robert Sternberg found that practical intelligence is almost entirely uncorrelated with IQ. You can have one without the other, and in day-to-day life, practical intelligence wins more often. The fourth is creative intelligence, the ability to connect things that don't obviously belong together, to generate novel solutions, to see a problem from an angle nobody else considered. Neuroscience shows that creative intelligence is strongly linked to what's called the default mode network, the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on anything in particular, which is why your best ideas come in the shower, or on a walk, or just before you fall asleep. Your mind needs space to be creative, and we are living in an era that is systematically eliminating that space. Here's the piece that most intelligence content leaves out. These are not fixed. Every single one of these dimensions can be developed. The brain science is clear on this. To build analytical intelligence, deliberate practice on unfamiliar problems, not your comfort zone. Chess, logic puzzles, learning a new programming language, studying a field completely outside your own. Discomfort is the signal that growth is happening. To build emotional intelligence, and this one surprises people, journaling, specifically writing about your own emotional reactions to events, then questioning them. Why did I react that way? What was I actually feeling underneath that? What was the other person feeling? This kind of reflective practice measurably improves emotional self-awareness over time. It is a skill. It responds to training. To build practical intelligence, put yourself in unfamiliar situations where the rules aren't written down. Travel somewhere new. Take on a project outside your expertise. Volunteer in a context completely different from your daily life. Practical intelligence grows through exposure to complexity you can't fully control. To build creative intelligence, protect your unstructured time like it is precious, because it is. The default mode network, your creative brain, needs boredom to function. Walk without your phone, sit without a screen, let your mind wander. The connections it makes in that space are the raw material of original thinking. And underneath all 4, sleep. Always sleep. Because a tired brain scores lower on every single one of these dimensions,
Not slightly lower, significantly lower. Everything we talked about 2 episodes ago applies here completely. Here is the thing I want you to carry with you. At some point, most of us absorbed a story about our own intelligence. Maybe it came from a grade, a teacher's comment, a test result, a comparison to someone else. And somewhere along the way, we started treating that story as fixed, as fact. But intelligence, real intelligence, the full spectrum kind, is not a number. It is not a ranking. It is not something that was decided about you before you were old enough to have a say. It is a system, a living, adaptable, trainable system. And the most extraordinary thing the science tells us is this: the people who understand that, who treat their intelligence as something to be developed rather than something to be measured, they consistently outperform people with higher IQ scores who believe their intelligence is fixed. The belief itself changes the outcome. So whatever number you were ever given, whatever story you were told about how smart you are, let it go. Because the brain you have right now, today, is capable of more than any test ever measured. If that shifted something for you, subscribe. See you in the next one.